The summer sun blazed mercilessly over the Montana Territory as Elijah Reed squinted at the flash of movement among the thicket of wild berries. He reined in his horse, dust settling around them as he peered through the shimmering heat. There, half hidden among the brambles, a woman moved carefully from bush to bush, her slender fingers plucking ripe berries and dropping them into a worn cloth sack. What caught his attention most was the small bundle secured to her back, a baby, sleeping peacefully despite the sweltering July heat of 1876. Elijah had been riding the boundary of what would soon be his ranch for the better part of the day. After 5 years of driving cattle, sleeping under stars, and saving every penny, he'd finally purchased a modest spread near the newly established town of Riverspend. The woman was gathering berries on what was technically his land, but that hardly mattered. What concerned him was that she was alone in wildland known for predators, both animal and human. He approached slowly, not wanting to startle her. His horse's hooves crunched on the dry grass, and the woman's head snapped up. Her eyes widened with alarm, and she immediately backed away, one hand flying protectively to the baby carrier on her back. "Madam," Elijah called, keeping his voice gentle as he raised his hands to show he meant no harm. "Don't be frightened. I'm just passing through." She didn't respond, but her posture remained tense, ready to flee. Her dress was simple but clean, though showing signs of wear. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical bun, with wisps escaping to frame a face that, while drawn with fatigue, possessed a quiet beauty. "My name's Elijah Reed," he continued, remaining atop his horse to appear less threatening. "I own this piece of land, but you're welcome to the berries. There's plenty for everyone." "I didn't realize this was someone's property," she finally spoke, her voice soft but steady. "I'll leave right away." "No need," Elijah said quickly. "Like I said, berries are free for the taking." He nodded toward her sack, which was only half full. "Looks like you could use a bit more time." The baby on her back stirred and made a small sound. The woman reached behind to gently pat the child, soothing it back to sleep with practiced movements. "That's a mighty hot way to carry a little one," Elijah observed. "You got far to go back home?" Her hesitation told him everything he needed to know before she even spoke. "We're managing fine, thank you." Elijah dismounted slowly, keeping a respectful distance. Up close, he could see the exhaustion in her eyes and the slight sunburn across her cheekbones. "Madam, I don't mean to pry, but are you staying somewhere nearby?" "We're between places at the moment," she admitted reluctantly. "I see." Elijah removed his hat, wiping sweat from his brow. "Look, I've got a small cabin not far from here. Nothing fancy, but there's shade and water. You and your little one could rest up before continuing on your way." Her eyes narrowed with suspicion. "I don't know you, sir." "That's fair enough." He nodded, respecting her caution. "Name's Elijah Reed, like I said. Former cattle driver, now trying my hand at ranching. And you are?" After a long pause, she answered, "Penelope. Penelope Walker. And this," she gestured to the baby, "is Samuel. Pleased to meet you both, Mrs. Walker." "Miss," she corrected quickly, then looked as if she regretted the clarification. Elijah nodded, filing away this information without comment. "Well, Miss Walker, my offer stands. Or if you prefer, I could fetch some water and bring it back here. Your boy shouldn't be out in this heat much longer." At the mention of her son, Penelope's resolve seemed to waver. She glanced at the sky, judging the position of the sun, then back at Elijah's honest face. Something in his steady gaze must have reassured her. "Some water would be appreciated," she conceded. "But we'll stay right here." "Fair enough." Elijah returned to his horse and retrieved a canteen. "This is fresh from the spring this morning." He walked halfway toward her, then set the canteen on a flat rock and backed away, giving her space. Penelope approached cautiously, picked up the canteen, and took a small sip. Finding it satisfactory, she took a longer drink before carefully maneuvering to give some to the now awake baby. "He's a handsome boy," Elijah commented, watching the child's bright eyes take in the world around him. "How old?" 8 months, Penelope answered, her voice softening when she spoke of her son. "He's usually good-natured, but this heat makes him fussy." "Can't say I blame him," Elijah said with a gentle smile. "Miss Walker, I don't mean to be forward, but night's coming in a few hours. There's not much in the way of shelter around here, and the nights can get cold. even in summer. Penelope straightened her spine. We've managed so far. I'm sure you have, Elijah agreed, admiring her determination despite his concern. But there's no need to make things harder than they need to be. My cabin has 2 rooms. You and Samuel could take the bedroom, and I'd sleep in the main room. Or if you'd rather, I could take you into town. There's a decent boarding house. I can't afford a boarding house, Penelope admitted, her cheeks coloring slightly. Elijah considered this. Then let me offer you work. I need help around the place cooking, cleaning, that sort of thing. You'd earn your keep and have a safe place for your boy, just until you figure out your next step. Her eyes narrowed again, searching his face for any sign of deception. Why would you help a stranger? Elijah shrugged, his weathered face sincere. Because someone once helped me when I needed it. Besides, I've been eating my own cooking for too long. Another week, and I might not survive it. This drew a small, reluctant smile from Penelope. She looked down at her half-filled sack of berries, then at the position of the sun, and finally at her son, who was becoming increasingly restless in the heat. I can cook, she said finally, and clean, but I'll need to bring Samuel with me while I work. Wouldn't have it any other way, Elijah assured her. And the arrangement lasts only as long as you want it to. You're free to leave anytime. Penelope nodded slowly. One night. We'll see after that. One night. Elijah agreed, feeling an unexpected wave of relief. He hadn't realized how concerned he'd been about leaving them out here alone. My horse can carry us both. The cabin's about a mile from here. Penelope hesitated again, but when Samuel began to fuss more insistently, she relented. With careful movements, she allowed Elijah to help her onto the horse, keeping the baby secured against her. Elijah mounted behind her, maintaining a respectful distance as he reached around to take the reins. As they rode through the golden afternoon light, Elijah couldn't help noticing the scent of berries and something like lavender that clung to Penelope's hair or the protective way she held her son. He wondered what circumstances had brought this proud, cautious woman to be alone in the wilderness with a baby, but he knew better than to ask. Some stories needed time to be told. The cabin came into view as they crested a small rise, a simple structure with a porch across the front and a corral off to one side. It wasn't much, but Elijah felt a surge of pride seeing it. His own place at last. It's not fancy, he said as they approached, but it's solid. No leaks, even in the spring rains. It looks. Penelope seemed to search for the right word. Peaceful. Elijah smiled at that. That it is, Miss Walker. That it is. He helped her down from the horse, careful not to touch her more than necessary, respecting the boundaries she had clearly established. As he led them toward the cabin, he found himself hoping she might stay longer than just one night, not only because she clearly needed a safe haven, but because the cabin already seemed less empty with her and the baby approaching its door. Inside, the cabin was simple but clean. Elijah had built most of the furniture himself, a table with 4 chairs, a sideboard, a rocking chair near the stone fireplace, and through the open door to the bedroom, a bed with a quilt that had seen better days. The bedroom's yours, Elijah said, gesturing toward it. I changed the sheets last week, but there are clean ones in the trunk if you'd prefer. Penelope nodded, taking in her surroundings with careful scrutiny. Samuel was fully awake now, looking around with curious eyes from his carrier. May I? She asked, gesturing to a chair. Of course. This is your home now, at least for tonight. Make yourself comfortable. Elijah moved to the sideboard. I've got some dried apple slices. Would Samuel like some? If he's eating solid food, that is. He is. That would be kind, thank you. Penelope carefully removed the baby carrier and sat with Samuel in her lap. The boy had his mother's dark hair and wide, intelligent eyes. He regarded Elijah with open curiosity rather than fear. Elijah brought over a small piece of dried apple, and after Penelope approved, offered it to the baby, who grabbed it with surprising strength and immediately began gumming it enthusiastically. He's got a good grip, Elijah observed with a smile. Yes, Penelope agreed, a hint of pride warming her voice. He's strong. Like his mother, Elijah said, then worried he'd overstepped. But Penelope merely gave him a measured look before returning her attention to her son. I'll start on supper, Elijah said, moving toward the small kitchen area. Nothing fancy, just beans, salt pork, and biscuits. I can help, Penelope offered, rising with Samuel balanced on her hip. You rest. There'll be plenty of time for you to cook tomorrow, if you're still here. He paused. I hope you will be. I meant what I said about needing help around here. Penelope didn't respond directly, but moved to the window, looking out at the land spreading away from the cabin. It's a beautiful piece of country. I think so. Saved 5 years for the down payment. Elijah busied himself with the cooking, giving her space to think. 5 years is a long time to work towards something, she observed quietly. Worth every minute, he replied, stoking the fire in the small stove. A man needs roots eventually. Penelope bounced Samuel gently as he began to fuss. Some of us don't have that luxury. Elijah wanted to ask what had happened to her, where she was going, why she was alone, but he held his tongue. Instead, he said, well, you've got a roof tonight. Tomorrow can take care of itself. They ate supper as the sun set, casting long shadows across the cabin floor. Samuel fell asleep in Penelope's arms, his small face peaceful in slumber. Elijah noticed how Penelope's shoulders gradually relaxed as the evening wore on, though her eyes still carried that watchful wariness. When it was time to retire, Elijah showed her to the bedroom and made sure she had everything she needed. I'll be right out here if you need anything, he assured her. The door has a lock if you'd feel safer. Penelope nodded, shifting Samuel in her arms. Thank you, Mr. Reed, for all of this. Elijah, please. And you're welcome, Miss Walker. Penelope, she corrected softly. Good night. He heard the lock click after she closed the door, and despite the slight sting to his pride that she still didn't fully trust him, he respected her caution. A woman alone had to be careful, especially one with a child to protect. As Elijah made his bed on the bench near the fireplace, he found himself wondering about the story behind Penelope Walker and her son. Whatever had happened, he hoped she'd find some peace here, even if just for a short while. Outside, the Montana night spread its star-filled canopy over the cabin, and for the first time since purchasing his land, Elijah felt that it might truly become a home. Morning came with the soft sounds of Samuel's babbling and Penelope's gentle hushing. Elijah had been awake for an hour already, having stepped outside to tend to his horse and bring in fresh water. He was preparing coffee when the bedroom door opened, and Penelope emerged with Samuel on her hip. Good morning, Elijah greeted them. Sleep well. Better than I have in some time, Penelope admitted, adjusting her simple dress, which showed signs of having been carefully smoothed. Her hair was neatly arranged, and she had washed both herself and Samuel with the basin of water Elijah had left outside their door earlier. Glad to hear it. Coffee's almost ready, and I've got some flapjack batter mixed. He nodded towards Samuel, who was regarding him with bright, curious eyes. Not sure what the little one eats for breakfast. He can have some of whatever we're having, mashed up a bit, Penelope said, moving toward the kitchen area. Please, let me help with breakfast. It's the least I can do. Elijah stepped aside, allowing her to take over the cooking. He watched as she competently managed both the stove and her son, who was perched on her hip. You're good at that, he observed. Multitasking. Necessity, she replied simply, flipping a perfect flapjack with one hand. They ate breakfast together, and Elijah was struck by how natural it felt, as if this woman and child belonged at his table. Samuel, for his part, seemed delighted with the flapjacks, though more ended up on his face and the table than in his mouth. I've got some chores to tend to today, Elijah said as they finished eating. Got a fence line to check on the north side. But first, I should show you around, help you get settled. Penelope hesitated, then asked, Did you mean what you said yesterday? About work? I did. Place needs a woman's touch, that's for certain. And I'll pay fair wages, not just room and board. She seemed to consider this, absently wiping Samuel's sticky hands. I'd like to stay on then, for a while at least, until I can save enough to move on. Elijah finished for her when she trailed off. I understand. The arrangement works for as long as you need it to. Relief washed over her face. Thank you. I'm a hard worker, Mr. Reed. Elijah. You won't regret this. I'm sure I won't. He smiled, finding himself genuinely pleased that she had decided to stay. After breakfast, Elijah showed Penelope around the cabin and the immediate surroundings, the vegetable garden he'd started but neglected, the chicken coop with its half-dozen laying hens, the smokehouse, and the small creek that ran along the eastern edge of the property. The water's clean, he explained. I use it for drinking and cooking. There's a deeper pool about 50 yards downstream that's good for bathing, though I usually heat water for washing up here at the house." Penelope nodded, taking in everything with practical assessment. Samuel, strapped to her back again, seemed fascinated by the chickens, pointing and making excited noises each time one moved. "He likes animals," she said with a hint of a smile. "Smart boy," Elijah replied. "Man's got to appreciate good livestock." This drew a real smile from Penelope, brief but genuine, and Elijah found himself wanting to see more of it. "I should get to that fence line," he said reluctantly. "Will you be all right here by yourself?" "We'll be fine," Penelope assured him. "I'll get started on setting things in order. The garden could use some attention." "Don't work too hard on your first day," Elijah cautioned, "especially in this heat." "We're used to hard work," she replied, that proud lift returning to her chin. Elijah nodded, recognizing he'd touched on some kind of sore spot. "I'll be back before sundown. There's a shotgun above the door if you need it, though we don't get many visitors out here." He saw alarm flash across her face at the mention of visitors. "Just being cautious," he added quickly. "This is safe country, by and large." Penelope seemed to compose herself. "Thank you. We'll be fine." As Elijah rode out, he glanced back to see Penelope already kneeling in the garden, Samuel sitting on a blanket beside her, playing with a wooden spoon Elijah had given him. The sight stirred something in his chest, a longing he hadn't acknowledged before. His land, his cabin, they were achievements, but they weren't quite a home. Not yet. Shaking off the thought, he turned his horse northward. He had a fence to mend and a living to make. Whatever Penelope Walker's story was, it wasn't his business unless she chose to share it. But as he rode, he couldn't help hoping she might stay long enough for him to earn the right to hear it. The days fell into a rhythm as July melted into August. Penelope brought order to the cabin with efficient hands, turning the sparse bachelor dwelling into something approaching a home. She cooked meals that made Elijah realize just how poorly he'd been eating, planted herbs alongside the vegetables, and even fashioned curtains from fabric she found in town after Elijah insisted on giving her an advance on her wages. Samuel thrived in the open air and regular routine. He was crawling everywhere now, and Penelope had to keep a constant eye on him. Elijah found himself fashioning toys for the boy, a small wooden horse, a rattle made from a hollowed gourd with dried beans inside, a tiny chair sized just for him. They developed an unspoken understanding. Elijah didn't ask about her past, and Penelope didn't inquire too deeply about his. But in the quiet evenings, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains, bits of their stories emerged naturally. "I started driving cattle when I was 16, Elijah told her one evening, as Samuel played with wooden blocks on a blanket between them. "My pa died, and there wasn't enough land to support Ma and my 3 sisters. So I took to the trails." "That couldn't have been easy," Penelope observed, her hands busy with mending one of Elijah's shirts. "It was the making of me," he replied. "Learned how to work hard, how to get along with all sorts of men, how to survive on little. Saved every penny I could. For this place," she said, looking out at the land spreading before them, golden in the fading light. "For a home," he corrected gently. "Land's just dirt without the right people on it." Their eyes met briefly before Penelope looked away, focusing on her stitching. "Your mother and sisters, are they still living?" "Ma passed 3 years back. My sisters are all married now, scattered across 3 states. Write to them when I can." He paused, then ventured, "What about your family?" Penelope's hands stilled for a moment. "My parents died when I was 14. Influenza. I had a brother, but we lost touch." Elijah sensed there was more to that story but didn't press. "I'm sorry to hear that." Samuel chose that moment to topple his tower of blocks with a squeal of delight, breaking the somber mood. Penelope smiled at her son's antics, and Elijah found himself watching her face more than the child's. In these unguarded moments, when she smiled or laughed, she was breathtakingly beautiful. "He's getting more adventurous," Elijah observed as Samuel began crawling toward the porch steps. Penelope quickly set aside her mending and scooped up the baby before he could reach the edge. "He's fearless. I worry he'll be climbing before he walks. Takes after his mama, I'd wager," Elijah said with a smile. "Got that same determination." A shadow crossed Penelope's face. Perhaps. It was the opening Elijah had been waiting for, But he hesitated, not wanting to shatter the comfortable peace they'd established. Yet if she was going to stay, and he increasingly hoped she would, there were things he needed to understand. Penelope, he began carefully, I'm not asking you to tell me anything you don't want to. But if there's something or someone you're worried about, I'd like to help. She was quiet for so long that Elijah thought she wouldn't answer. Samuel had settled in her lap, playing with a button on her dress, oblivious to the tension. Samuel's father, she finally said, her voice so low Elijah had to lean closer to hear, was not a good man. I thought he was, at first. He was charming, well-spoken, the son of my employer. Elijah remained silent, giving her space to continue. When I told him I was with child, she swallowed hard. He made it clear he wanted no part of it. Suggested I take care of the problem. When I refused, he threatened to have me fired, to tell everyone I was. She couldn't finish. You don't have to say more, Elijah assured her, anger burning in his chest at this nameless man. I need to. Penelope insisted, her voice stronger now. I left in the night, took what little I had saved. I've been moving ever since Samuel was born, taking work where I could find it. But it's hard, with a baby. Is he looking for you? Elijah asked, the question that had been burning in his mind. I don't think so. He wanted me gone. But his father, Samuel's grandfather, is a powerful man in Denver. If they ever found out where I was. She looked down at her son. I won't let them take him from me. He's all I have. Elijah's hands tightened on the arms of his chair. No one's taking that boy from you. Not while I'm around. Penelope looked at him then, really looked at him, as if seeing him clearly for the first time. Why do you care what happens to us? We're nothing to you. The question caught him off guard with its directness. That's not true, he said finally. Maybe you were strangers when I found you picking berries, but you're not nothing to me now, Penelope. Not by a long shot. Their eyes held, and something shifted between them, an acknowledgement of feelings that had been growing since that first day. But Penelope broke the contact first, rising with Samuel in her arms. It's getting cool. We should go inside. Elijah nodded, understanding her need to retreat from the intensity of the moment. I'll be in shortly. As she went inside, Elijah remained on the porch, watching night claim the land. His mind turned over what she had told him, filling in the gaps she'd left. A wealthy family in Denver, a son who'd taken advantage of a household employee, a woman alone facing impossible choices. He'd meant what he said, he wouldn't let anyone take Samuel from her. But the realization of how deeply he cared for both of them was startling in its clarity. Somewhere between finding her gathering berries and tonight, they had become essential to him. The question was, could he become essential to them as well? Not just as protection or security, but as something more permanent? Inside, he found Penelope putting Samuel to bed in the small crib he'd built after her first week at the cabin. The boy was already half asleep, his eyes heavy as his mother hummed a soft lullaby. Elijah stood in the doorway, reluctant to intrude on the tender moment. When Samuel was finally asleep, Penelope turned and saw Elijah watching. Rather than appearing startled or embarrassed, she simply nodded and came to join him in the main room. He's a good sleeper now, she said quietly as she passed him. Not like when he was younger. You're a good mother, Elijah told her, following her to the fireplace where a small blaze took the chill off the evening air. I'm trying to be, she replied, sitting in the rocking chair he'd come to think of as hers. Every day I worry I'm not doing enough for him. From where I stand, you're doing everything a mother should do and more. Elijah took the chair opposite her. You're brave, Penelope. Braver than most men I know. She shook her head. Not brave, just desperate. Sometimes they look the same from the outside, he said with a small smile. But I know the difference. They sat in companionable silence for a while. The crackling fire the only sound besides Samuel's occasional soft snore from the bedroom. I've been thinking, Elijah finally said, about what comes next. Penelope tensed slightly. What do you mean? Winter will be here before we know it. It gets harsh in these parts, too cold for you and Samuel to be thinking about moving on. He leaned forward, his forearms on his knees. I'd like you to stay through the winter, at least. We can build a proper room for Samuel. Maybe expand the kitchen like you mentioned. That sounds like more than a temporary arrangement. Penelope observed carefully. It could be, Elijah acknowledged, meeting her eyes steadily. If you wanted it to be. The implication hung in the air between them. Penelope's hands twisted in her lap, a rare display of nervousness. Elijah, you don't have to answer now, he interjected quickly. It's just something to consider. For Samuel's sake, if nothing else. She nodded slowly. For Samuel? Yes. But they both knew it was about more than just the practicalities of raising a child. In the weeks they'd spent together, something had grown between them, a mutual respect that had blossomed into deeper affection. Elijah saw it in the way Penelope's eyes followed him when she thought he wasn't looking, in how she'd taken to having his coffee ready just the way he liked it in the mornings, in the small touches she allowed, now a hand on his arm when passing, shoulders brushing as they worked side by side. And he knew she must see it in him too, in the way he sought reasons to be near her, how he'd begun bringing her small gifts from town, a ribbon for her hair, a picture book for Samuel, and how he'd built the crib without being asked, knowing she couldn't keep laying the baby on a pallet on the floor. Whatever you decide, Elijah said gently, this is your home for as long as you want it to be. No strings attached. Penelope's eyes glistened in the firelight. Thank you, she whispered, for everything. Later that night, as Elijah lay on his bed in the main room, he'd upgraded from the bench to a proper cot weeks ago, he stared at the ceiling, wondering if he'd said too much, pushed too hard. Penelope had been through so much. The last thing he wanted was to make her feel pressured or obligated. But he couldn't deny the truth any longer. He was falling in love with her. Maybe it had been since that first day, when he'd seen her fierce protectiveness of her child, her stubborn independence despite impossible odds. She wasn't like any woman he'd ever known, and the thought of her leaving someday hollowed him out inside. He'd have to be patient, give her time. She'd been betrayed by a man she trusted. Earning her heart shouldn't be easy. But Elijah Reed was nothing if not persistent. He hadn't saved for 5 years to buy this land by giving up when things got difficult. With that resolve firmly in mind, he finally drifted off to sleep, dreaming of a future where Penelope and Samuel were permanently part of his life, and his cabin finally became the home he'd always envisioned. September brought cooler days and the first hints of autumn color to the trees along the creek. The vegetable garden yielded a bountiful harvest, thanks largely to Penelope's careful tending, and they spent several days preserving food for the winter, canning vegetables, drying herbs, smoking meat from the deer Elijah had hunted. Samuel took his first wobbly steps on a crisp morning while Elijah was building shelves in the root cellar. Penelope's excited call brought him running, and together they watched, laughing and applauding, as the determined little boy toddled 3 steps before plopping down on his padded bottom. Did you see? Penelope exclaimed, her face alight with pride and joy. He walked. I saw. Elijah confirmed, grinning broadly. Stubborn little fellow. Gets that from his mother. Instead of her usual mild protest at such teasing, Penelope surprised him by saying, and his determination from the man who's becoming like a father to him. The words struck Elijah speechless. It was the first time Penelope had acknowledged aloud the role he was beginning to play in Samuel's life and, by extension, in hers. I'd be honored, he finally managed, his voice rough with emotion, to be anything like a father to him. Their eyes met, and something passed between them, an understanding, perhaps, or a promise. But before either could speak further, Samuel demanded their attention by pulling himself up on a chair and attempting another precarious journey. The moment passed, but Elijah carried the warmth of it with him throughout the day. That evening, after Samuel was asleep, he brought out a small package wrapped in brown paper. What's this? Penelope asked as he handed it to her. Just a little something I picked up last time I was in town, Elijah said, suddenly feeling uncharacteristically nervous. Go on, open it. Penelope carefully unwrapped the package to reveal a book, a collection of poetry by Emily Dickinson. Her fingers traced the embossed cover with reverence. I noticed you looking at it in the mercantile window, Elijah explained. Thought you might enjoy some reading material for the long winter evenings ahead. It's beautiful, she whispered, opening the book to read the inscription he'd asked the shopkeeper to write. To Penelope, who brings poetry to everyday life. From Elijah, I hope you don't mind the inscription, he said when she remained silent. I'm not much good with words myself, but I thought. His explanation was cut short when Penelope rose from her chair and, in a move that surprised them both, pressed a soft kiss to his cheek. Thank you. she said, her face flushed as she stepped back. It's the most thoughtful gift I've ever received. Elijah's hand rose unconsciously to touch the spot where her lips had been. You're welcome, he managed, his heart hammering in his chest. That night marked a turning point. Though nothing was officially declared between them, the atmosphere in the cabin changed, charged with unspoken feelings and growing certainty. Penelope began to let down her guard more often, sharing stories of her childhood in Ohio, of her dreams before life had taken such unexpected turns. Elijah, in turn, spoke of his hopes for the ranch, his plans to expand beyond the small herd of cattle he'd started with, his vision for the future. And increasingly, that future included her and Samuel, not as temporary guests, but as permanent fixtures in his life. As October painted the landscape in brilliant hues of red and gold, Elijah decided it was time to broach the subject that had been on his mind for weeks. They'd ridden into town together for supplies. Samuel perched happily in front of Elijah on his horse, while Penelope rode the gentle mare Elijah had purchased specifically with her in mind. The townspeople of Riverspend had grown accustomed to seeing them together, and though Elijah was aware of the occasional curious glance or whispered speculation, no one had directly questioned their arrangement. Mrs. Hollister at the general store had taken to referring to them as a family, and neither Elijah nor Penelope had corrected her. While Penelope selected fabric for winter clothes and Samuel played with the storekeeper's cat, Elijah slipped next door to the jeweler's shop. He'd been saving a portion of his cattle sales for this moment, and though the selection was limited in the small frontier town, he found what he was looking for: a simple gold band set with a small, perfect pearl. For your lady? The jeweler asked with a knowing smile as he wrapped the ring in a velvet pouch. Hope to be, Elijah replied, tucking the pouch securely in his vest pocket. Back at the general store, he found Penelope deep in conversation with Mrs. Hollister, who was cooing over Samuel's newest accomplishment, saying "Mama" and "up" quite distinctly. And who's this handsome fellow? Mrs. Hollister asked as Elijah approached, gesturing toward him but looking at Samuel. Elijah, Samuel exclaimed, reaching pudgy arms toward him with complete trust. The simple childish abbreviation of his name hit Elijah like a physical blow of joy. It was the first time Samuel had attempted his name, and the significance wasn't lost on anyone present. Well, I'll be, Mrs. Hollister chuckled. Seems like he knows exactly who you are, Mr. Reed. Seems he does, Elijah agreed, his voice gruff with emotion as he lifted the boy into his arms. Over Samuel's dark curls, his eyes met Penelope's, finding them bright with unshed tears and something that looked very much like love. The ride home was quiet, each lost in thought as the horses picked their way along the trail that was becoming familiar to all of them. Samuel eventually fell asleep against Elijah's chest, his small body warm and trusting. They were nearly home when Elijah finally gathered his courage. Penelope, he began, drawing his horse alongside hers. There's something I've been wanting to ask you. She turned to him, her expression open yet guarded, as if she both anticipated and feared what he might say. Yes. But before Elijah could continue, the sharp crack of a rifle shot split the air, and Penelope's horse reared in panic. She clung desperately to the saddle as the mare bolted forward, leaving Elijah calling her name as he struggled to control his own startled mount while protecting the now wailing Samuel. By the time he calmed his horse, Penelope was out of sight around the bend in the trail. Cursing under his breath, Elijah urged his horse forward, one arm securely around Samuel. He rounded the bend to find Penelope's mare standing riderless in the middle of the path. Fear clutched at his heart as he scanned the area frantically. Penelope, he called, his voice echoing through the trees. Penelope, where are you? Here, came her shaky response from a cluster of boulders to the left of the trail. She emerged slowly, holding her arm at an awkward angle. I'm all right. The mare threw me when she spooked. Elijah dismounted carefully, keeping Samuel close as he rushed to her side. You're hurt, he said, noting her grimace of pain as she moved. Just my wrist. I think it might be sprained. She looked anxiously at Samuel, who was still crying. Is he all right? He's fine, just scared. Elijah shifted the boy to his other arm to examine Penelope's injury. We need to get you home and tend to this. Can you ride? I think so. She winced as he gently probed her wrist. What was that shot? Hunters. Elijah's expression darkened. Maybe, but we're not far from the property line. Could be someone trespassing. He glanced around warily. Let's get back to the cabin. I don't like being exposed out here. He helped Penelope onto his horse, then handed Samuel up to her before gathering the reins of her mare. They continued homeward at a cautious pace, Elijah constantly scanning their surroundings for any sign of threat. By the time they reached the cabin, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the yard. Elijah quickly stabled the horses, then hurried inside where Penelope was attempting to soothe both Samuel and herself. Let me see that wrist, he insisted, setting water to boil for a compress. Samuel, little man, it's all right. Mama's going to be fine. The boy's tears subsided as Elijah spoke to him in calm, reassuring tones. Penelope watched them together, her expression softening despite her pain. You're good with him, she observed as Elijah gently wrapped her wrist with a clean cloth soaked in the hot water. He's easy to be good with, Elijah replied with a small smile. Brave, like his mother. Penelope winced as he secured the bandage. I don't feel very brave right now. That shot, it reminded me. She trailed off, but Elijah understood. Of what you're running from, he finished for her. Do you think it could be them? Samuel's father or grandfather? She shook her head uncertainly. I don't know. I've been careful, haven't sent any letters that could be traced. But Edgar, his father, has connections. If he really wanted to find us. Edgar what? Elijah asked, needing to know the name of the man who might threaten what he was coming to think of as his family. Harrington, Penelope admitted reluctantly. Edgar Harrington. His father is Judge William Harrington of Denver. Elijah let out a low whistle. Influential folk. Yes, that's why I've been so careful. Penelope's eyes filled with tears. I thought we were safe here. I thought, you are safe, Elijah interrupted firmly. It was probably just a hunter who didn't realize how close he was to our property. But even if it wasn't, even if by some chance they have found you, they'll have to go through me to get to you or Samuel. The fierceness in his voice seemed to startle her. Elijah, you don't know what they're capable of. Judge Harrington could have you arrested on some trumped-up charge, or worse. I don't care who they are or what power they think they have, Elijah stated flatly. No one is taking Samuel from you. And no one is taking you from, he caught himself, but it was too late. From what? Penelope prompted softly. Elijah took a deep breath, his hand unconsciously moving to the velvet pouch in his pocket. This wasn't how he'd planned it, but perhaps there would never be a perfect moment. From me. He finished, his eyes holding hers steadily. If you'll have me, that is. Understanding dawned on Penelope's face. Elijah, are you asking you to marry me? Yes, I am. He withdrew the pouch and opened it, revealing the pearl ring. I love you, Penelope. I think I have since I found you picking those berries with Samuel on your back. I love that boy too, like he was my own. I want to be a family officially, properly. Penelope stared at the ring, then at Elijah's earnest face. But my past, the complications, are part of you. And I love all of you, he stated simply. I'm not afraid of complications or challenges. I'm only afraid of losing you. Tears spilled down Penelope's cheeks as she reached for him with her uninjured hand. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I'll marry you. Elijah's heart soared as he slipped the ring onto her finger, then gently pulled her into his embrace, mindful of her injured wrist. Samuel, sensing the emotional shift, patted both their faces with his small hands, drawing laughter from them both. Look at that, Elijah said, his voice thick with emotion. He approves. He adores you. Penelope confirmed, resting her head against his shoulder. As do I. Their moment of joy was interrupted by the distant sound of approaching horses. Elijah immediately tensed, moving to the window to peer out into the gathering dusk. Stay here, he instructed, reaching for his rifle above the door. Keep Samuel quiet. Elijah, no. Penelope pleaded, fear evident in her voice. If it's them, then I'll handle it, he assured her, checking that the rifle was loaded. But I won't let them intimidate us on our own land. Before she could protest further, he stepped onto the porch, rifle held ready but not raised. In the fading light, he could make out 3 riders approaching the cabin at a steady pace. As they drew closer, his grip on the rifle tightened. The lead rider was expensively dressed, his horse a fine-looking thoroughbred that had no business on frontier trails. The other two men had the hard look of hired guns. Evening. Elijah called as they halted a respectful distance from the cabin. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" The well-dressed man urged his horse forward a few steps. "I'm looking for a woman named Penelope Walker. I have reason to believe she's staying here." "And who might be asking?" Elijah countered, his voice deliberately casual despite the tension coursing through him. "My name is Edgar Harrington," the man replied with the confident air of someone used to his name opening doors. "I believe Miss Walker has something that belongs to me." Inside the cabin, Elijah heard Samuel begin to fuss, and Penelope's soft voice attempting to quiet him. Edgar Harrington's head snapped toward the sound, his expression hardening. "That would be my son," he stated coldly. "I've come to claim him." Elijah's finger twitched near the trigger, but he kept his composure. "Respectfully, Mr. Harrington, I think you should turn around and head back to Denver. There's nothing for you here." Harrington's face flushed with anger. "Do you know who I am? Who my father is? I could have this miserable piece of land seized and you in jail by the end of the week." "You could try," Elijah acknowledged, "but it wouldn't end well for anyone. Especially not for the boy you claim to want." "He is my son," Harrington insisted. "I have rights." "Rights?" Elijah couldn't keep the disgust from his voice. "A man earns the right to be called a father. From what I understand, you forfeited any claim when you abandoned them both." Harrington's expression twisted with rage. "How dare you, Edgar?" Penelope's voice came from behind Elijah as she stepped onto the porch, Samuel held protectively in her arms. Despite her fear, she stood tall, her chin raised defiantly. "Leave us alone. You made your choice when you told me to take care of the problem. Samuel doesn't need you now, and neither do I." Edgar's gaze fixed on the child, a flicker of something like genuine emotion crossing his face before it hardened again. "My father is dying, Penelope. He wants to meet his grandson, to secure the family legacy. The boy should be raised as a Harrington, with all the advantages that entails." "His name is Walker," Penelope replied firmly. "Soon to be Reed." She moved to stand beside Elijah, her uninjured hand slipping into his. "We're getting married. Elijah is the only father Samuel will ever know." Edgar's eyes narrowed as he noticed the ring on Penelope's finger. "You'd choose this rancher over the opportunities one can provide? Think of the boy, Penelope. What kind of life will he have out here in the wilderness?" "A good one," Elijah interjected. "With people who love him for who he is, not for what name he carries or what legacy he might continue." Edgar seemed genuinely perplexed, as if he couldn't comprehend their resistance. "I'm prepared to be generous," he offered. "A settlement for you, Penelope, and the finest education for the boy. You wouldn't have to struggle anymore." "We're not struggling," Penelope replied, her voice gaining strength. "We're building something here, a family, a home. Samuel will learn the value of hard work, honesty, and love. That's worth more than all your father's money." For a long moment, Edgar simply stared at them, the defiant young woman he had once dismissed so easily, the child he had never acknowledged, and the steady-eyed rancher prepared to defend them both. Something in his expression shifted, a grudging recognition, perhaps, that he had misjudged the situation. "My father won't accept this," he finally said, but the threat in his voice had diminished. "He's not accustomed to being denied." "Then it's time he learned," Elijah replied evenly. "Just as you did." Edgar's jaw tightened, but after a tense silence, he gathered his reins. "This isn't over," he warned, but there was a note of uncertainty in his voice that belied the words. "Yes, it is," Penelope stated with quiet finality. "Goodbye, Edgar." Without another word, Edgar Harrington wheeled his horse around and rode away, his hired men following close behind. Elijah and Penelope remained on the porch, watching until they disappeared from sight, the sound of hoofbeats fading into the gathering darkness. Only when they were truly gone did Penelope sag against him, the strength that had carried her through the confrontation suddenly deserting her. Elijah wrapped his arm around her shoulders, holding her and Samuel close. "Do you think he'll come back?" she whispered against his chest. Elijah considered this, wanting to reassure her, but unwilling to lie. "He might try," he admitted, "but I don't think his heart is truly in it. He came because his father demanded it, not because he wants to be a father to Samuel." Penelope nodded slowly. "I saw it in his eyes." He looked at Samuel and felt nothing. No connection, no love. His loss, Elijah said simply, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. Our gain. They went inside, securing the door behind them. The cabin that had seemed so vulnerable moments before now felt like a fortress, not because of its walls, but because of the love within them. As they prepared for bed, Penelope suddenly turned to Elijah, her expression serious. I want to be married as soon as possible, she declared. I don't want to wait. Elijah's heart swelled at her words. Neither do I. We could ride into town tomorrow, see if the preacher's available. Yes, she agreed, her smile returning. Tomorrow. That night, Elijah slept on his cot in the main room for what he knew would be the last time. Soon, he would share the bedroom with Penelope as her husband, and this space would become Samuel's room. The thought filled him with a contentment he had never known before. Outside, the Montana night spread its star-filled canopy over the small cabin where two people had found each other against all odds, and a little boy would grow up knowing the true meaning of family. The wedding took place the following afternoon in Riversbend's small white church. It was a simple ceremony, attended by the handful of neighbors and townspeople who had come to know them over the past months. Mrs. Hollister from the general store had insisted on baking a cake, and the blacksmith's wife had gathered wildflowers to decorate the church and fashion a small bouquet for Penelope. Penelope wore a dress of soft blue calico that she had finished sewing just that morning, with Samuel perched on her hip in his best clothes, occasionally reaching for the flowers in her hair. Elijah, freshly shaved and wearing the one good suit he owned, couldn't take his eyes off them as they walked down the short aisle toward him. Never seen a man look so blessed, the preacher murmured to Elijah as Penelope approached. We're so ready to defend that blessing. Elijah nodded, understanding the dual meaning. News of Edgar Harrington's visit had spread quickly through the small community, and there was an unspoken agreement among the townspeople. Penelope and Samuel were now under their collective protection. The Harringtons might have power in Denver, but out here, neighbors looked after their own. The vows were traditional, but spoken with profound sincerity. When Elijah promised to love, honor, and protect Penelope and Samuel for all his days, his voice rang with absolute certainty. And when Penelope pledged herself to him, the lingering fear that had shadowed her eyes for so long seemed to finally lift. By the authority vested in me, the preacher concluded, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Mr. Reed, you may kiss your bride. Elijah gently took Samuel with one arm, then drew Penelope close with the other, sealing their union with a tender kiss that promised all the tomorrows they would share. Samuel, caught between them, patted their faces in his customary gesture of affection, drawing laughter from the congregation. Ladies and gentlemen, the preacher announced with a broad smile, may I present Mr. and Mrs. Elijah Reed and young Master Samuel Reed. The small church erupted in applause as Elijah and Penelope turned to face their new community as a family, officially and irrevocably bound together. The celebration continued at the town's only restaurant, where the owner had prepared a special dinner in their honor. There was music from a fiddle and harmonica, dancing, and more food than any of them could eat. Samuel became the center of attention, passed from arms to arms, delighting everyone with his bright smiles and curious eyes. As the evening drew to a close, Elijah found Penelope standing apart from the festivities, watching Samuel being bounced on the knee of the town's elderly doctor, who was entertaining the boy with exaggerated faces. Happy, Mrs. Reed? Elijah asked softly, coming to stand beside her. Penelope turned to him, her eyes shining. More than I ever thought possible, she admitted. It doesn't seem real sometimes that after everything, I could find this kind of happiness. It's real, he assured her, taking her hand and raising it to his lips. And it's just the beginning. They rode home beneath a canopy of stars, Samuel sleeping peacefully in Penelope's arms, the horses picking their way carefully along the familiar trail. The cabin windows glowed with welcoming light. Mrs. Hollister had insisted on going ahead to prepare things properly for the newlyweds, which apparently included lighting every lamp and the fireplace. At the threshold, Elijah surprised Penelope by sweeping her and Samuel into his arms, carrying them both across the doorway. I believe it's traditional, he explained with a grin at her startled expression. Both of us, she laughed softly, mindful of the sleeping child. My family, Elijah said simply. All or nothing. Inside, they discovered Mrs. Hollister had done more than light lamps. The table was set with a cold supper for later. A bottle of wine stood uncorked to breathe, and in the bedroom, the bed was turned down with fresh linens and scattered with late-blooming wildflowers. That woman thinks of everything. Elijah chuckled as they put Samuel to bed in his crib. She's been a good friend. Penelope agreed, brushing a gentle kiss across her son's forehead before joining her new husband in the main room. Elijah drew her into his arms, finally able to hold her properly without the constraints of propriety or the weight of unspoken feelings between them. "I've wanted to do this since the day I found you," he murmured, his lips finding hers in a kiss that spoke of long restrained desire. Penelope responded with equal fervor, her initial shyness melting under the heat of his touch. "I never thought I could trust a man again," she whispered when they finally parted, breathless. "But you changed everything, Elijah. You changed everything for me too," he replied, leading her toward their bedroom. "Showed me that land is just dirt without the right people to share it with." Later, as moonlight filtered through the curtains and Penelope lay nestled against him, Elijah reflected on the extraordinary turn his life had taken. 3 months ago, he had been a solitary man with a piece of land and modest dreams. Now he was a husband and father, his heart fuller than he had ever imagined possible. "What are you thinking?" Penelope asked softly, her hand tracing patterns on his chest. "That I'm the luckiest man in the Montana Territory," he replied honestly. "And that I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you and Samuel never regret choosing to stay with me." "We won't," she assured him, raising herself on one elbow to look into his eyes. "You're our home, Elijah. Wherever you are, that's where we belong." As winter descended on the Montana Territory, blanketing the land in pristine white, the Reed family settled into a rhythm of domestic contentment that seemed to insulate them from the harsh weather outside. Elijah had completed Samuel's room before the first snow, moving the boys' crib and adding shelves for toys and books. Penelope had sewn warm curtains and quilts, making each room cozy and inviting. They had heard nothing more from Edgar Harrington or his father, though Elijah remained vigilant, never quite letting down his guard when strangers appeared on the horizon. But as weeks passed into months with no sign of trouble, they began to hope that perhaps Edgar had truly accepted their decision. Christmas approached, bringing with it preparations that filled Penelope with childlike excitement. Having spent the previous year's holiday alone with a newborn, constantly moving and afraid, she threw herself into creating traditions for their first Christmas as a family. "I want Samuel to remember this," she explained as she decorated the cabin with pine boughs and red ribbons. "Even if he's too young to really understand, he'll have plenty of Christmases to remember," Elijah assured her, watching with amusement as she fussed over the placement of every ornament on the small pine tree he had cut for them. "This is just the first of many." On Christmas Eve, as a gentle snow fell outside, they exchanged simple gifts by the light of the fire. Elijah had carved a rocking horse for Samuel, who immediately attempted to climb aboard with gleeful determination. For Penelope, he had commissioned a locket from the jeweler in town, a simple gold oval that opened to reveal a tiny daguerreotype of the three of them, taken during their wedding celebration. "It's perfect," Penelope whispered, tears in her eyes as she fastened it around her neck. "I'll never take it off." Her gift to him was a hand-knitted scarf and a leather-bound journal. "For your dreams," she explained as he turned the blank pages. "For all the plans you have for our future. I want to be part of them all." Later, after Samuel was asleep and the fire had burned low, they sat together on the small sofa Elijah had built during the autumn, watching the snow through the window, content in their shared silence. "I have one more gift," Penelope said suddenly, turning to face him with an expression both nervous and joyful. "But it won't arrive until summer." It took Elijah a moment to understand her meaning, but when he did, his face transformed with wonder. "Are you saying we're going to have another baby?" she confirmed, her hand instinctively moving to her still flat stomach. "Samuel will have a brother or sister." Elijah gathered her into his arms, his heart so full he could barely speak. "When?" he finally managed. "July, I think. Almost exactly a year since you found us picking berries." The symmetry of it struck them both, This new life beginning at the anniversary of when their own new life together had started. Full circle, Elijah murmured, his hand covering hers protectively over their unborn child. Everything that matters to me began with those berries. As winter gave way to spring, and spring blossomed into early summer, Penelope's condition became increasingly evident. Samuel, now a sturdy toddler running everywhere on determined little legs, seemed fascinated by his mother's changing shape, often patting her rounded belly and chattering in his expanding vocabulary about the baby inside. Elijah found himself even more protective than before, insisting on doing the heavier chores and hiring a local boy to help with the ranch work so he could stay closer to home. The cattle herd was growing, the land prospering under his care, and he had plans to build a larger house the following year to accommodate their expanding family. "You're hovering again," Penelope teased one evening in late June as he insisted on bringing her a footstool. "I'm pregnant, not made of glass." "Can't help it," he admitted with a sheepish grin. "Never been a father-to-be before. Don't quite know how to act." "You're doing fine," she assured him, pulling him down for a kiss. "Better than fine. But if you truly want to help, you could take Samuel berry picking tomorrow. He's been asking, and I'm too ungainly to scramble through those bushes." "Berry picking." Elijah chuckled at the significance. "Seems fitting. Samuel's old enough to help now, not just ride along." "He's growing so fast," Penelope agreed with a touch of maternal wistfulness. "Sometimes I look at him and can hardly believe he's the same tiny baby I carried on my back that day." "He has your determination," Elijah observed fondly. "And your eyes. And your stubborn chin," she countered with a smile. "He may not have your blood, but he's becoming more like you every day." The pride those words kindled in Elijah's chest was immeasurable, though he never spoke of it aloud. He sometimes marveled at how completely he had come to think of Samuel as his son. The boy called him Papa now, ran to him with complete trust, looked to him for guidance and protection. The bond between them was as real and unbreakable as any tie of blood could be. The next morning dawned clear and warm, perfect for berry picking. Elijah lifted Samuel onto his shoulders, the boy's excited chatter a constant accompaniment as they made their way to the thicket where, almost a year before, he had first spotted Penelope. "Remember, little man," Elijah instructed as he set Samuel down near the bushes. "Only pick the dark ones. The red ones aren't ready yet." Samuel nodded solemnly, his small face screwed up in concentration as he carefully selected a plump blackberry and dropped it into the bucket Elijah held. More berries ended up in the boy's mouth than in the bucket. His face and hands quickly stained purple with juice, but Elijah didn't mind. These were the moments he had never known he wanted until they became his life, teaching a child the small lessons that would shape him, sharing simple joys that would become memories. They had been picking for about an hour when Samuel suddenly pointed toward the trail that led back to their cabin. "Mama," he exclaimed with delight. Elijah turned, startled to see Penelope making her way slowly toward them, one hand supporting her back, the other shading her eyes against the sun. "Penelope," he called, hastily gathering Samuel and the bucket of berries. "Is everything all right?" "I think," she replied, her voice strained, "that the baby has decided to arrive early." Elijah's heart lurched. "Now? But it's too soon. Only by a few weeks," she reassured him, wincing as another contraction gripped her. "But we need to get back to the cabin. My water broke just after you left. Why didn't you call for me?" Elijah demanded, rushing to support her while balancing Samuel on his hip. "I thought I had time," she admitted. "I wanted to wait until Mrs. Peterson arrived. I sent the ranch hand to fetch her. But then the pains started coming faster, and I was afraid to be alone." Elijah quickly assessed their options. The cabin was closer than town, and if Penelope had already sent for the midwife, that was their best course. "Can you walk?" he asked, his arm steady around her waist. She nodded grimly. "Just slowly." They made their halting way back to the cabin, Samuel unnaturally quiet, sensing the tension in his parents. When they finally reached the house, Elijah helped Penelope to the bedroom, while keeping Samuel occupied with the promise of more berries. "Shouldn't Mrs. Peterson be here by now?" Elijah fretted as Penelope's contractions grew closer together. "Babies come in their own time," Penelope gasped, gripping his hand with surprising strength. "This one's impatient," like their father. Despite her attempt at humor, Elijah could see the pain and fear in her eyes. "What do I need to do?" he asked, determined to be useful. "Boil water," she instructed between breaths. "Clean cloths. And keep Samuel occupied." Elijah hurried to obey, setting water to boil on the stove, while simultaneously attempting to distract Samuel with a wooden puzzle. The boy, however, was too perceptive to be fooled, his eyes constantly straying to the bedroom door where his mother's occasional cries could be heard. "Mama hurt?" he asked, his lower lip trembling. "No, little man," Elijah assured him, kneeling to meet his eyes. "Mama's bringing your brother or sister into the world. It's hard work, but she's strong. The strongest person I know." Samuel considered this solemnly. "Help Mama." "That's exactly what we're going to do," Elijah agreed, lifting the boy into his arms. "You're going to be my special helper today." Just then, the sound of a wagon approaching reached them, and Elijah nearly sagged with relief. Mrs. Peterson, the experienced midwife who had delivered half the children in the county, bustled in with the efficiency of someone who had seen it all. "So the little one's in a hurry, is it?" she remarked, immediately taking charge. "Well, we'll soon see about that. You keep the boy out of the way, Mr. Reed. This is women's business now." Elijah reluctantly withdrew from the bedroom, knowing Penelope was in capable hands but hating to leave her side. He took Samuel outside to the porch, where they could hear less of what was happening inside, and attempted to keep the boy engaged with stories and games. The hours stretched interminably. The sun began its descent toward the western mountains, painting the landscape in hues of gold and amber. Samuel eventually fell asleep in Elijah's lap, exhausted from the emotional day. And still, they waited. Just as dusk was falling, the cry of a newborn pierced the evening quiet. Samuel startled awake, his eyes wide, as Elijah's heart leapt with joy and relief. "That's your new brother or sister," he told the boy, his voice thick with emotion. "Let's give them a few minutes with Mama and Mrs. Peterson, then we'll go meet them." Samuel nodded solemnly, his small hand patting Elijah's cheek in that gesture of affection that never failed to move him. "Baby crying," he observed. "That's good," Elijah assured him. "It means they're strong, like you were." When Mrs. Peterson finally appeared at the door, her lined face creased in a tired smile, Elijah knew everything was all right. "You have a daughter, Mr. Reed," she announced. "A beautiful, healthy little girl. And your wife is asking for you both." Elijah carried Samuel into the bedroom, his heart pounding with anticipation. Penelope lay propped against the pillows, her face pale but radiant, a small bundle cradled in her arms. She looked up as they entered, her smile encompassing them both. "Come meet your daughter," she said softly to Elijah, then to Samuel. "Come see your sister, my brave boy." Elijah sat carefully on the edge of the bed, positioning Samuel so he could see the tiny, perfect face nestled among the blankets. The baby had a dusting of dark hair, and, when she briefly opened her eyes, they were the deep blue of all newborns. "She's beautiful," Elijah whispered, gently touching his daughter's cheek with a calloused finger. "Just like her mother." "What shall we call her?" Penelope asked, leaning into his side as Samuel cautiously reached out to touch his sister's hand. Elijah considered for a moment, then suggested, "What about Elizabeth? After my mother?" "Elizabeth," Penelope repeated, testing the name. "I like it. Elizabeth Reed." She looked down at their daughter, then at Samuel, who was now completely fascinated by the baby's tiny fingers. Our family," Elijah echoed, his arm encircling them all. The woman he had found gathering berries with a baby on her back, the boy who had become his son in every way that mattered, and now this new life they had created together. His heart felt too full for his chest, overflowing with a love and gratitude that defied expression. Outside, the Montana summer night descended, stars emerging one by one in the vast sky. Inside the cabin, the Reed family welcomed its newest member, the circle of love expanding to embrace her. And Elijah knew, with absolute certainty, that this moment, these people was what he had been working toward all along, though he hadn't known it when he first set out to claim his piece of the frontier. This was the true legacy he would leave, not land or cattle or buildings, but the love that had transformed a simple cabin into a home. 5 years later, the Reed Ranch had grown almost beyond recognition. The small cabin had been expanded into a proper house with 4 bedrooms, a spacious kitchen, and a covered porch that wrapped around 3 sides. The cattle herd numbered over 100 head, and Elijah had added sheep and horses to their livestock. A barn, bunkhouse, and several outbuildings completed the prosperous homestead. But the heart of it all remained the family that had begun with a chance encounter in a berry thicket. Samuel, now 6 years old, was a sturdy, serious boy with his mother's thoughtful nature and his father's quiet determination. Elizabeth, 5, had her father's auburn hair and her mother's expressive eyes, and a spirit of adventure that kept them all on their toes. And 3-year-old James, named for Elijah's father, was a sunny-natured child with a mischievous streak that belied his angelic appearance. Penelope had blossomed in these years of security and love. No longer the wary, exhausted young woman Elijah had first encountered, she now moved with the confidence of someone who knew her place in the world as a wife, mother, and respected member of the community. She had started a small school in one of the ranch outbuildings, teaching not only her own children, but those of neighboring homesteaders and ranch hands. Elijah, for his part, had become one of the most successful ranchers in the county, known for his fair dealings and innovative methods. But his greatest pride remained his family. Each night, as he looked around the dinner table at the faces of those he loved, he marveled at how richly his life had been blessed. They never heard from Edgar Harrington again after that confrontation years ago. News eventually reached them that Judge William Harrington had passed away, leaving his considerable fortune to his son, who had apparently married a Boston socialite and settled into a life far removed from the Montana Territory. "Do you ever wonder?" Penelope asked Elijah one evening as they sat on the porch watching their children play in the yard. "What Samuel's life would have been like if Edgar had taken him?" Elijah considered this, watching as Samuel patiently helped little James climb onto the wooden horse he had long outgrown. He would have had material advantages, certainly. The finest education, social connections, wealth. But, Penelope prompted, sensing his reservation. But he wouldn't have known what it means to be truly loved for himself, not for his name or his position. Elijah's gaze moved to Elizabeth, who was attempting to teach the family dog to sit on command. He wouldn't have had siblings who adore him, or the freedom to become whoever he's meant to be. Penelope nodded, leaning her head against his shoulder. "I think about it sometimes whether I made the right choice for him. But then I see him with you, learning to ride, to build things with his hands, to care for animals and people with equal kindness, and I know I did." "You made the right choice for all of us," Elijah assured her, pressing a kiss to her temple. "You gave me a family, Penelope." There's no greater gift. As the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold, the Reed children's laughter echoed across the yard. In the distance, cattle grazed peacefully on land that had once seemed empty and full of promise, now fulfilled in ways Elijah could never have imagined when he first claimed it. From a chance encounter by a berry thicket to this moment of perfect contentment, it had been a journey neither of them could have predicted, yet one that seemed, in retrospect, somehow inevitable. Two souls finding each other against all odds, creating together the home they had both been seeking. "I love you," Elijah murmured against Penelope's hair, the words as true now as the first time he had spoken them. "Every day more than the last." "And I love you," she replied, her hand finding his. "For finding us that day, for offering help when I was too proud to ask for it, for seeing what we could become together." In the gathering twilight, their children ran to join them on the porch, a tumble of small bodies and eager voices, each demanding attention, each a living testament to the love that had begun when a cowboy found a young woman picking berries with a baby on her back and offered her more than just momentary help. He had offered her a future. And in accepting it, she had given him the same priceless gift, a family, a purpose, a home. Not just a house or a piece of land, but the true meaning of home, people to love, to protect, to cherish. People who made every sunrise a promise and every sunset a benediction on a day well lived. Together, they had built something that would endure long after they were gone, a legacy of love that would continue through their children and their children's children, stretching forward into a future bright with possibility. And it had all begun with berries, and trust, and the courage to believe in second chances.